Okay, so you've sent over a really interesting set of articles all about exploding pagers in Lebanon, and they're all from September 17, 2024.
Yep.
And we're looking at pieces from Al Jazeera, Reuters, CNN, and the BBC. So a pretty good range of global perspectives on this. And I think the big question that we need to get to the bottom of today is, was this a freak accident with these pagers or a deliberate attack? And if it was an attack, who is behind it?
Right.
So let's dive in.
Yeah, it's a wild one for sure. I think just starting with just the bizarreness of this.
Yeah.
Thousands of pagers detonating across Lebanon, injuring people. It's almost surreal. Reuters even mentioned that the Lebanese Red Cross had to deploy 50 ambulances and 300 medics to help.
Yeah, it sounds chaotic for sure. And one thing that all of the sources really highlight is this mystery that surrounds the how. It seems like nobody knows how these things exploded.
Yeah.
Can you imagine, like your pager, a piece of technology that most people haven't even seen in years, suddenly becomes a mini bomb?
Yeah.
It's like something out of a spy movie.
Right. And this is where I think the plot really thickens. Hezbollah is calling this their biggest security breach since the war with Israel started last October.
Yeah.
And that's according to both Al Jazeera and Reuters.
Which kind of begs the question, why even use pagers in 2024?
Right. Well, Al Jazeera suggests that it was actually a deliberate move to avoid Israeli surveillance. And it kind of makes sense when you think about it. Pagers use that one-way communication system. It's a lot harder to intercept than tapping into a smartphone's constant data stream.
Oh.
So it's this fascinating case of old tech being used for perceived security in a hyper-connected world.
But in this case, it backfired spectacularly.
Oh, it did. And then you've got the Lebanese Foreign Ministry. Their statement is calling it a dangerous and deliberate Israeli escalation. That's according to Reuters.
Yeah.
So now we have accusations flying.
Yeah, so that brings us to, I think, the million-dollar question, which is,
Yeah.
if this was an attack, was Israel actually behind it? And if so, why target pagers? It seems almost too strange, like a red herring almost.
Yeah, and that's where I think Israel's response, or lack thereof, becomes really intriguing. Reuters reports that they've remained totally silent on this, refusing to comment on the explosions.
Which is unusual, to say the least,
Is it?
especially given that, as our sources point out, Israel often takes credit for operations against Hezbollah.
Absolutely.
So this silence it's deafening
It
almost.
could be strategic. It could be that this is a covert operation that they want to keep under wraps. It allows them to maintain plausible deniability. Or they could be assessing Hezbollah's response.
Yeah.
Biding their time before they make a move.
Okay, so we've got this incident shrouded in mystery. We've got escalating tensions between Israel and Hezbollah. But I think it's really important to remember that this isn't happening in a vacuum. All of our sources, Al Jazeera, Reuters, CNN, they all point to the heightened tensions in the region ever since those Hamas attacks back on October 7, 2023.
Oh, absolutely. That event was a powder keg.
Right.
It reignited the Israeli-Palestinian conflict with a ferocity that I think shocked a lot of people. And it's been almost constant firefights on multiple fronts since then.
And now CNN is reporting that Israel just announced a new war aim, and that is the safe return of their citizens who fled the north because of Hezbollah's rocket fire. And that, to me, feels like a major escalation.
It is. Yeah, up until now, I think their focus has largely been on containing Hezbollah. But this signals a shift towards actively creating conditions for those citizens to return. And that could mean more aggressive military action against Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. And you throw these exploding pagers into the mix. I mean, it really is like tossing gasoline on an already raging fire, whether it's an accident or an attack or something else entirely. It adds this whole other dangerous layer of uncertainty to an already volatile situation.
Totally. It's like someone just tossed a lit match into a powder keg. And speaking of those pagers, I have to circle back to this whole idea of Hezbollah switching to pagers in 2024 to avoid surveillance. I mean, it seems almost comical at first, but as you were explaining earlier, there's a logic to it. These pagers are much harder to intercept than, say, tapping into a smartphone's, constant data stream. And I think it was Al Jazeera that quoted a military analyst who actually speculated that these pagers were likely tampered with before Hezbollah even got a hold of them.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, as much as we might think of pagers as this outdated technology, the technology itself isn't inherently insecure. In this case, it does seem more likely that someone exploited the supply chain or found a way to compromise these devices before they were even distributed, which is a chilling thought, but definitely possible.
So we're talking about a potential scenario here where someone essentially planted explosives in these pagers, just waiting for the right moment to set them off remotely.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly within the realm of possibility. Which then raises some serious questions about the vulnerability of technology in general. I mean, we live in this hyper-connected world. We rely on these complex systems every day. And this incident really highlights how even seemingly outdated tech can be exploited with potentially devastating consequences.
Right. It makes you wonder what system that we think is completely safe and secure today could be tomorrow's security nightmare.
Right, exactly. And that's the question, isn't it? But, this deep dive isn't just about international intrigue and, these spy thriller scenarios. There's another layer to all of this, a bit of a subplot that I think CNN really dives into. And that's that it seems that there is a power struggle happening within the Israeli government itself, with Defense Minister Gallant publicly clashing with Netanyahu over war strategy.
Yeah, CNN had that quote from Gallant, where he called the government's focus on the Gaza-Egypt border a moral disgrace, which is not exactly subtle language, coming from a high-ranking official in the middle of a war.
Right, it's a bold statement. And I think it reveals a deep division within Israel's leadership. Gallant is clearly advocating for a much more aggressive approach towards Hezbollah in Lebanon, seeing that as a more pressing threat than the situation in Gaza. And CNN even suggested that Netanyahu might be considering replacing Gallant with someone more hawkish.
Wow, which could be a disastrous move at this point.
It's a gamble, for sure.
Why?
I mean, replacing Gallant now could be seen as bowing to pressure from Hezbollah, potentially emboldening them to escalate things even further.
Yeah, talk about a lose-lose situation. So we've got potential sabotage, we've got a war that's already incredibly complex and multifaceted, and now we're seeing this internal political turmoil within Israel. I mean, where do we even go from here? It's a powder keg, isn't it? I mean, we've unpacked a lot here. Exploding pagers, accusations flying between Hezbollah and Israel, a war with no easy answers. And now cracks within the Israeli government itself. So what does it all mean?
It really does feel like a perfect storm of instability and uncertainty.
Yeah.
I mean, regardless of whether those pager explosions were a freak accident, a planned attack, or something else entirely, the incident has just thrown gasoline on an already volatile situation.
Yeah.
The potential for miscalculation and escalation here is huge.
It's like everything we've talked about today. The pagers, the war, aims, even the political infighting in Israel. It's all connected. And it feels like it's pushing this conflict towards a dangerous tipping point.
It is, and it's a stark reminder that while technology might be the tool, it's the human element, the decisions made under pressure, the long-standing grievances, that will ultimately determine how this plays out.
You mentioned earlier that this feels very reminiscent of 2006.
It does, doesn't it? The region is just trapped in this cycle of violence. And it begs the question, are we destined to repeat the mistakes of the past? Or is there a path towards a more peaceful future? And what role will technology, for better or for worse, play in shaping that future?
Those are questions worth pondering, for sure. Well, this deep dive has taken us from the streets of Beirut to the halls of power in Jerusalem and back again. We've explored the intersection of technology conflict and human fallibility, all against the backdrop of a region teetering on the brink. It's a lot to process, but hopefully this deep dive has given you, the listener, a clearer understanding of this complex and rapidly evolving situation. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll keep following this story closely as it develops.